Fiction, science fiction, horror, fantasy, crime, LGBT, thriller.
You have now entered the House of Mystery.
Welcome back into the House of Mystery. I'm Al Warren. We got Mr. Joe Goldberg in the house.
I'm in the house. I was just walking around the house.
Yeah.
Gazing at flowers and getting inspiration for writing. It's my break thing. Walk around the house.
Yeah. Walk around the house and gaze at flowers.
And the neighbors stare at me like, what the hell is he doing? But I'm like, hey, there's braining going on right here.
There you go. That's the word. Braining.
That's the word.
I've never heard of that before.
Yeah.
Wow. No. See, I learn something every day.
I just wish I was as smart as Jeffrey, because he's a lawyer and a producer and a writer, and I'm a schmo. So.
Yeah. Well, you're Joe
yeah,
Schmo.
Yeah. I'm Joe Schmo. I'm here all my life.
Well, and, and he's got another, I'm sure, great book, new book out. And let's talk to him about it. It's called The Circus of Satan. So we got Jeffrey Konvitz. Thank you for being here.
My pleasure, Alan. Thank you for inviting me.
Of course. Always a pleasure. So what keeps you going? Circus of Satan. Like it's been a while since you've done a book. And what brought you to this now? Like, how did he get here?
Well, that's an interesting story. Some people would say it's unbelievable, but if we have to go back to the 1970s when I wrote this monster bestseller, The Sentinel, and sold 5-6 million copies, and I then made a deal to do a sequel, and I was writing the sequel called The Guardian, which did well, not as well as The Sentinel, about 2 million copies. And back in those days, mass market paperback was the business. Hardcover was hardly out there. If you sold 10,000 hardcovers, you were a bestseller. But mass market was enormous, and we did very well. But while I was writing the second book, I read a book called Against the Evidence, which tickled the lawyer in me. I had already gotten out of law school. And it was a story, it was a nonfiction book about at the time, and maybe still today, the greatest murder trial in New York history that's never really been solved. It's been subject to conjecture. But I was fascinated by the book because it ended the rule of, from 1900 to 1910 or 12, virtually every major city in this country was controlled by the Irish. Politicians who controlled through the police department or the vice operators, all crime. And they would pay from the vice back to the politicians, who would then pay to get people into office. It was a circle of control. And then because of this case, everything collapsed around 1912. And out of that rose the Italian mobs and the Jewish mobs. First the Jews in labor racketeering, and then all of them in bootlegging. Well, how did this happen? What was this all about? I mean, nobody knows anything about this period. Believe me, no one knows anything. Very few people know about it. So I got fascinated, and I tried to do a fictional version of the Becker Rosenthal murders. 4 Jewish gamblers hired 4 Jewish killers who brought along one Dago, and they killed a Jewish gambler who had gone into the territory, Tenderloin, which the Protestant preachers called Satan's Circus, without permission. They threatened to kill him. He went to the press and told them the whole story about the connection between the police and the Irish powers at Tammany Hall and throughout the nation. He then published it in the Pulitzer's World. Herbert Bayard Swope published it, and several days later he was killed. And they blamed it on an Irish cop, because at that point, to connect the police department to Tammany Hall was the key. Once that connection was broken, the Irish mob collapsed. So I was fascinated by this. I wrote a fictional version of it. I read it, I hated it, and I put it away. 16 years later, after I got remarried, my wife Jill found the book, read it, and said, "This is an interesting story. You should do something with it." Now, in this interim period, I wasn't in the book business I was in the movie business. I was running 2 independent studios, producing movies, and financing movies. I really had no intention after my third book of going back and writing another book. I reread the book I wrote and it didn't work. And I just put it down. And about a year later, it hit me how to do it. Don't fictionalize it. Have your fictional plot running through it, but all the events have to be real. You're going to have to feather this fictional plot where our hero is involved with the destruction of the Irish mob, which leads to labor racketeering and bootlegging, and somehow use real events. So I started writing off and on because I was a practicing lawyer. I had to read 150 books of research because every character, there's dozens of real characters in the book. There's a dozen fictional characters that run through it. And I just kept coming back to it and coming back to it and coming back to it. And finally it triggered, and I got it. And I really put a lot of time in on it. And what I found out later on, by happenstance, I shouldn't say found out, it just occurred to me, when I started writing the book again around 1993, 1994. But in 2003, Gangs of New York came out, the DiCaprio film. And then in 2013, Boardwalk Empire came out. And I realized my book connected them, absolutely connected them. Because after Gangs of New York, the Irish were in control. In 1978, in the opening prologue, is the bar fight with the Irish. And then we go to 1910. We go up to 1913, and in the epilogues, one of the main epilogues is the murder of Big Jim Colisimo, who controlled all vice and crime in Chicago. And that's Boardwalk Empire started with that murder. So out of the blue, by accident, I filled in the middle period. I got excited. This is not easy to do by accident. You know, a broken clock is right twice a day. I guess I was a broken clock. I fumbled into it. Now, it has nothing to do with Gangs of New York and nothing to do with Boardwalk Empire, but it explains what happened in the middle period.
The characters, you've got so many characters and stuff. How much time do you give to each character, and how much do you get into their heads and work them out? Is it just enough to understand them, or where do you go?
Well, the main characters in the book, McGuinness is fictional, Monaghan's fictional. They're archetypes of characters that existed in those days. The inspector, prosecutor, Nederlanders, fictional. But most of the other key characters were real. Big Tim Sullivan, Arnold Rothstein. In his youth, he was in his 20s. Herbert Bayard Swope became the most famous reporter in the nation, and he was best friends with our anti-hero and best friends with Arnold Rothstein, although when Rothstein was murdered in around 1926, and they asked him, please say something about Arnold Rothstein, Herbert Bayard Swope said, I hardly knew the man. That's a joke. They were like traveling partners through my entire book and in actual history. So you had to find places for him. I mean, William Randolph Hearst is a major character in the book. Mayor William J. Gaynor is a major character. Big Tim Sullivan, Arnold Rothstein's a whole bunch of real people who were major characters in the book. But my fictional characters weave right through it. They're the most important. And they take you through the destruction of the Irish mob. And one thing that occurred to me as I was writing the book that I never realized, this was easily the most violent period ever in the United States. It was unbelievable. Between the Bowery and Tenderloin St. Circus and the levee in Chicago and St. Louis, which was the most violent city in the United States, and the Pendergast in Kansas City. An interesting note, the younger Pendergast brother and his older brother, their assistant was a guy named Harry Truman. And when Truman got the vice presidential nod, he was introduced by Robert Pendergast, a total gangster. And in fact, there are two other gangsters in the book who are major characters, Max and Moses Annenberg, of the famous Annenberg name, museums and philanthropic enterprises. Two gangsters from day one. And I learned things that I didn't know existed. Most people don't know this exists.
Why people's fascination with the mob? What is it?
Listen, it was a violent period. It's in the book. The politics of the period is very interesting. There are analogs to today. with the immigrants. You know what I discovered? That most of the Jewish gangsters in the Bowery were the sons of rabbis, cantors, and men of the Talmud. But when they came over from Eastern Europe, they didn't want anything to do with anything that had to do with Eastern Europe. This was the new playground. And they wandered into vice. They wandered into gangs. It was a rough period. But what's the fascination with crime books? Look at The Godfather, a lot of other books. The fascination, I guess, to me, was how real it was and how intricate it was, and that I was able to maneuver a plot through this maze of deceit and backstabbing and just absolute depravity was very satisfying. And I think when people read these kinds of books, they're seeing a world that they really don't know. It's interesting. They really don't know it. It's like if you were a scientist and you were reading about string theory, and you got to understand it, you saw the strings making up the protons and everything else, you'd be fascinated. People have a fascination with this. Let me put it with a little coda. One of my favorite books of all time, which I read numerous times, takes numerous times to understand it, is The Heart of Darkness by Joseph Conrad. And in that book, there are many layers that have been analyzed, the European dominance of the poor black people in the Congo, and that's what the book is about. But to me, the book was about the dark side that exists in every human being, as well as the light side. But if you remove the rule of law, and in this period of time, the rule of law was removed, everybody was corrupt. There was virtually no such thing as an honest cop. Everyone was on the take. Every politician was being bought. From Chicago to New York to Detroit and the Purple Gang to St. Louis to Kansas City, everybody was corrupt. And therefore, when you remove the rule of law, the dark side in most people, if you remove that element of ethics and morality, you turn to the dark. Everyone has it in them. And somehow when you read these kinds of books, you are revealing a little bit of your subconscious psyche. That's in there. It's fascinating. It's attractive. But we have laws. We have, hopefully, parents who instill the good and the bad in you. We have ethical constraints. Some of us are consciously aware of ethical constraints and morality. Others are subconsciously. But if you remove the rule of law, if you let things go out of complete whack, you're going to get it. And you got it in this book. This is what happened then. It happened with bootlegging. It's happened throughout history in other areas. But I think that's the fascination. The dark side of any individual is attracted to this because it's in them. That's my theory. I mean, I was a physics major in college. I mean, I'm not a psychoanalyst, but I've read enough. I've read a lot of Jung, and I've read a lot about projection of the subconscious, and that comes out in my writing. Even going back to the Sentinel was a choice between good and bad, God and Satan, and the choice that had to be made with all the twists and turns and horror in that plot. That was a horror story. Circus of Satan is a horror story, but not a horror story. It's just about a period that was horrible.
Right, horrific time, yeah.
Horrific period.
So is that kind of the theme in this as well? Good versus evil in an underlying way?
It's sometimes hard to analyze some of the things you put together in a book. Self-analyze. I do know that part of my own sense of ethics, morality, life and death, justice is in the book, in the character, the main character. There are great scenes between him and Rabbi Bershinsky, who taught him how to fight, where they get into deep discussions about justice. Is there justice in this life or justice in the next life? And a lot of the reviews pointed that out, that when you reach the end of the book, there's a major issue that you have to contemplate. What is justice? Is revenge justice? Do you have to have revenge in this life? Will there be revenge in the next? Is the universe unbalanced unless you correct it in this life? There's a lot of heavy discussions in this book. I must say, amid all the killings, violence, and all that sort of stuff, there's a lot of ethical stuff in this book, which I'm proud of. I mean, doesn't slow down the reading, I don't think, because the reading is nonstop. Every chapter has a cliffhanger or a plot twist throughout the book. But there are interesting discussions.
Is that hard for you, sharing your own sort of morality within a story or feelings about things like that?
No, because it was kind of automatic. It just came out as I sat in front of the computer. And I looked at both sides. I mean, this is not me arguing my point of view. I had Rabbi Brzezinski arguing his. I have other characters in the book, Herbert Bayard Swope and our anti-hero, going at each other, but good about the frame-up of the Irish cop, which brought down the Irish mob. I mean, Herbert Bayard Swope and the prosecutor were heavily behind the conviction of the Irish cop for ordering the murder of Beansy Rosenthal. And years later, when the Irish cop was up for clemency to the governor, the district attorney who put him away was the governor. He turned him down. They executed him. And there's a real conversation between the anti-hero, my main character, and Swope, where our main character says, "You know he didn't do it. You know you set him up. You set him up because you wanted to be important, and you wanted to be the greatest reporter of all time. You gave away your morality and ethics for power." There's those discussions that go on in the book, which I'm proud of. You know, anyone can write, people chopping heads off and stabbing people, shooting people.
Well, Jeffrey, this is a cliche question, but I think it's really important for your book. Perhaps is the importance of the location, of being in New York and other places. What role does that play to develop the character of the people, the character of the book, the feel, the texture, the taste?
Well, let me move away from the character and let me tell you one of my great experiences, because the book is technical as to what goes on between the 5 Points, the Bowery, Little Italy. I spent an entire week walking the Bowery, Little Italy, and what was the 5 Points is now the federal courthouse. And I had a tape measure with me, and I measured every street, so in the book I would know how far all these places were. And what was astonishing, and I did the same thing with the levee in Chicago, what was astonishing was that in the book you feel like the 5 Points or the earlier Irish ghetto is miles away from the Bowery ghetto where all the Jews were. The Irish were in the 5 Points, the Jews were in the Bowery, the Italians were in Little Italy. A lot of them moved into the Bowery during the day to work. Miles away. You know what it was? 4.5 blocks. It was like the wall in King Kong. On one side of the wall was Kong and dinosaurs, and the other side were the natives. But they were 10 feet apart. I was stupefied. I couldn't believe how close it was. So in the opening prologue, when I have the Hessex Kid running away from the Irish mob, I then knew how long it would take to get to the Bowery. Very quick. And I did the same thing in Chicago. And then with respect to the people, it was difficult. I had to rely on my research. Every real character in this book, I read an entire book on. I wanted to know everything about them. The Annenbergs, Herbert Bayard Swope, Big Jim Colisimo, Johnny Torrio, Big Tim Sullivan, Arnold Rothstein, book after book. It's all piled up in my law office. And even though I didn't use a lot of it, I still wanted to know it. I wanted to be an expert on the subject. So it was between the physical, and I have great physical descriptions, the Bowery and Satan's Circus and the levee and St. Louis, which was so violent it was a joke. And then the people I generated from my research, reading about them, because I couldn't talk to them. I couldn't talk to anyone like them. They didn't exist anymore. They were a special breed back then. Now, there are parallels today. Other people, I would want to get in to try and figure out who's the parallel of my book. My book stands on its own 2 feet. I'm very proud of it. Hopefully it's doing well in pre-orders. It's published June 17th. We're doing a lot of things, ads. We got a 4-page ad in Publishers Weekly. I'm doing the best I can with an indie published book. And this is interesting. My first 3 books were all majors. First book was Simon & Schuster and Random House, Ballantine. My second was Bantam. My third was Ballantine, Random House. I had major publishers behind me, but this one, I wanted complete control. I wanted to design the cover. I was not happy with the first book's cover. I wanted to design the ad campaign, which I have. I want to design, it's similar to what I do in the movie business. When I finance a picture and put together all the financing with the companies I ran, I was in control. I mean, I would have people doing things, but I had the final say. I wanted the final say on this book. And I found a great partner who joined up with me to create the publishing company. So this book is different. You can only get it online at Amazon and Barnes & Nobles and the Kobo and all those things. Can't be in the bookstore because the discount rate in a bookstore is so high we wouldn't make any money. There's a 14% difference, which eats up all the money. So on an indie published book, unless you're a very rich person and don't care, you almost have to go print on demand. Just the nature of the business.
Yeah, you have to be like Joe.
That's me, all 4 of my books. Yeah, maybe this one too. I'll be calling up Gatekeeper Press here probably in a little while.
Well, they did a great job. I'm very proud of them. They were great. I can't say enough good things about them. I had an idea for a change in the cover. The next day it was done. We edited the book. It was fixed. It was done exactly the day they said. And we're doing a little marketing campaign with them too. But if I had to recommend any company to do an indie published book, they would be at the top of my list, based on my own experience. I can't speak for anyone else. And, as a practicing lawyer, a trial lawyer, appellate lawyer, a finance lawyer, I can be difficult if I don't like what's going on.
We don't read that here in you, no.
I didn't say a peep. I argue more with judges than I did with these guys. These guys are great.
But as an author, you have this control of your characters, of the scenes, of the setting, of the pacing, of the distance, and it's difficult to hand it to somebody else, right? It's a child. You're giving away a child, right?
We can qualify that by saying that I spent 25 years on this. This was not a joke to me.
Right.
Although The Sentinel is my signpost book that everyone in the entertainment business in the horror area knows I'm kind of like a legend. I doubt I'm a legend to my kids, but I'm a legend to people in the horror business. I'm just Dad. Hey, Dad, you got some extra money for us?
Yeah.
Whatever.
Buy my book.
And the same thing with my friends. And I have a lot of terrific friends, but I'm just a guy on the tennis court with them. I'm no one important. And I'm not 28 years old anymore like when I wrote The Sentinel. Or 31, 28, 29, I forget. I think I was still in my 20s. I'm a little older now, and I wanted to get this done. By the way, The Sentinel was submitted to 30 publishing companies and turned down by every one. Simon & Schuster picked it up for $2,500. Then I got a call from my agent one day, who was a close friend of mine. He says, they just sold the book, the paperback rights to Random House, and there's an offer on the table from Universal. Now here I am, 1974. I was an MGM production executive. They had fired everybody, new people were taking over. They gave me a 6-month office, but I had no money. I had $1,500 in the bank. And suddenly I had an offer for the paperback rights for $600,000. The movie rights for $500,000. The foreign rights for $400,000. It was unbelievable.
Turn it down.
Yeah, I should have turned it down.
Yeah. Wow. How does something like that change you?
It didn't really.
No?
I stayed the same yo-yo that I was even before I made the money. Yes, I bought a house. I spent time in Aspen skiing. But the things that were important to me stayed the same. I was a absolute, as I am today, but I can't do it anymore, basketball fanatic. I played in college. I played in semi-pro. I played in senior events. And that was my life. 5 nights a week, I'd go play basketball at the Sports Club LA, full court. And no one knew what I did for a living. I was a lawyer who wrote a book or something or other. I didn't care. What I cared about was stopping the other guy from scoring. And I played against some NBA guys that I gave trouble to. Or hitting a great shot or a drive or a reverse drive. That was important to me. And then ultimately tennis, and then skiing. I ski raced. But that was important in my life. I really never held myself out as an important person, which was really funny because a couple of years ago, by accident, I wandered upon a list of the most famous people that ever graduated from Columbia Law School. And of course, the top of the list was Teddy Roosevelt, Franklin Delano Roosevelt, Ruth Bader Ginsburg. And I'm going down to all these heads of industries and everything else. And there I get to 166. It says, Jeff Konvitz, best-selling author of the Sentinel. I was laughing so hard I couldn't stop. I said, this list has to be bogus. It can't be real.
Any list of your name on it, right?
And there was my name. I was just laughing. I said to my wife, let me see if I can overtake Ruth Bader Ginsburg, who also went to Cornell as I did. I said, she's ahead of me there too. That was humorous. No, it didn't change me. I actually, when I was younger, I was far more intense than I am now. Now I'm much more even-tempered. Probably the day I started trying cases, and I knew if anyone stepped out of line, I could sue them and rip them to shreds. I calmed down. It was a calming influence.
That legal system. Let me ask a process question, or
sure,
whatever you want to define this as. You know, everybody writes a book, thinks their book should be a movie and things like that. But you live in the movie visual world, and in the writing of your book, was it a movie in your head? How did it flip together?
Absolutely. Actually, the beginning of Circus of Satan was a screenplay. I did it as a screenplay first. Not because I thought I would sell it, but it was my outline. I solved a lot of the problems. The problem is I was writing the wrong book. I was writing this fictional thing. It didn't work. But at least I had established the characters. And when I went back to write what is now the book, I really didn't have movies in mind. I was actually producing a movie right then with Leslie Nielsen called Spy Hard at Disney. And that was my movie stuff right there. And I was putting a fund together and financing some movies. So I really wasn't thinking about it. But with the change in the industry, once the miniseries became important, and that's even before streamers. It was earlier on. I was very close with everybody at HBO. I knew exactly what was going on. I mean, the chairman, the president, the head of films, they were all my close friends. I saw a miniseries in this. Not the way I see it now. Now I see a 10-part streamer. It can't be a movie. It's too big. It covers 13 years. And there's so many big things that happen in here. I mean, it's especially the Triangle Shirtwaist Fire and how it's tied into the plot and how everything comes apart from my anti-hero who was relying on certain people to do things. And they're all at Triangle, where women are jumping out to their death from the building, and he doesn't know it. It all plays into the plot. But absolutely, in the last 4 or 5 years, I see this as a miniseries. I've actually just given it to Kevin Costner. We'll see what happens. And my next door neighbor, Jason Bateman. We'll see what happens. And if it doesn't come together that way, I'm in the business. I will try to put together a package. Fortunately, my older daughter is a partner at one of the 3 major agencies. She may help. Since I'm still paying one of her college loans, she may help.
Well, if you need an overweight Jewish guy from Iowa for something, there's a Goldberg's available at some point.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah, I see it as a miniseries. Absolutely.
Wow. And so you must picture all your cast members too, right through. They must have an image, and maybe even you can hear their voice.
Yes, it's true. And you're going to ask me, who would I see in the parts?
Well, I don't know. Are you the type? Do you when you're doing that? Are you seeing a person that's maybe known?
Oh no, not when I'm writing. But when I'm done writing, and my wife, who's an actress, when we sit around talking about who could play the parts, then I see who would be right in what part.
You didn't see it while you were writing it.
And sometimes it's an unknown. We were watching a movie, name of which I forget, but one of the leads was Elvis Presley's granddaughter. And I certainly know the actor who was involved. He was bearded in the movie. It's about the music business. Sam Claflin. And I said to my wife, I said, he could play McGuinness. Sam Claflin is so good, and looks the part. And then guess what? He's cast as the Count of Edmond Dante's in the Count of Monte Cristo, which runs throughout my book too, because my hero is driven like Edmond Dante's in the Count of Monte Cristo.
My favorite book.
To extract whatever he's extracting. So that was an interesting thought. And then knowing the character of Monaghan, the ex-fireman who rises up through Tammany Hall, destroys everyone above him, including his mentors, takes on the whole city, is as vicious as they come. I said, there's only one guy who can play him, Leonardo DiCaprio. He is perfect.
If anybody's going to do it, it's going to be you, right?
I don't know about that. There are a lot more important people out here than me, but I can get to them.
You know where they live.
I can find them under the rocks.
Yeah, that's important. So is that what you want to see done? You want it into a miniseries and run with it, right?
I would love to see it in a miniseries. You know, people say, well, have they bought the rights yet? I said, let's be realistic. The book isn't out yet. We're doing a giant 4-page ad in Publishers Weekly, which is the variety of the book business. I got a whole bunch of interviews to do, and we're doing promotions and everything else. Things happen when they happen. Maybe someone will contact me and say, I read the book, we're interested. Maybe they won't. Maybe I'll go to an agency and say, I want you to represent this, like Creative Artist Agency or William Morris Endeavor. Let's get a showrunner. I'm not a showrunner. I can't do a 10-part. I could produce a movie, but to do a 10-part miniseries is way beyond my skills. You've got to coordinate everything for 10 productions. But I would be involved as an executive producer creatively. Or they're not going to make a deal with me. I'm not on, I'd rather go sell pencils than give it away. And I have a partner too. But yes, I'd love to see it as a miniseries. There's tons of stuff that isn't in the book that I could put in. The first draft of the book was 1,300 pages.
Ouch.
It got down to 531, which is still a lot. But I left a lot on the cutting room floor. It's there. It's there. In fact, there's a whole chapter of how Tammany Hall killed William Randolph Hearst's quest for the mayoralty from where he would be jumping into the presidency, running for president, how they destroyed his campaign. I have a chapter on that. I could have 3 hours on that. It was treachery beyond belief, what they did to destroy his political career. So, we'll see what happens. You do the best job you can do. And you know what? As I've told people, if I sold one book, and not more than one book, I would still be proud of what I did.
Right.
It's that simple.
Yeah. Glad we don't have all that corruption and problems now in the world.
Oh, no, sure.
You've learned so much over time.
Yeah. It's a little different, but it's only a different shade of gray.
Yeah. Has a different face on it.
It's, we're different today. We have the internet. We have cell phones. We have private channels that, we have the whole world here, all the dynamics. Back then, they didn't have that. You barely had a telephone. It was, the telephone was working. Cars were going 30 miles an hour, not, Ferraris racing through the streets. It was a different area where you couldn't have what's happening today have then, and you wouldn't have now what was happening then. Simply because of technology. It was just different.
Yeah, different world.
I mean, the things that happened in my story that couldn't happen today, because someone would pick up a cell phone and, the whole thing would go apart.
You wrote a book about a cell phone?
They couldn't get a hold of people. At the critical moments of my book, they couldn't get a hold of people. Hey, just pick up a cell phone and call them.
Yeah.
It's not allowed nowadays. You got to have cell phones and the whiz kid who knows how to crack and hack everything, make life easy.
Yeah.
They have all the answers.
Look, I certainly know it. My younger daughter is in national security at the Treasury Department. It's like a different world.
Yeah.
I have no idea what she does, but it's a different world working for the government.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. It's a whole new world we live in. And speaking, so when you wrote like The Sentinel compared to now, different obstacles in your writing, different things. Was it just the same experience? Do you know what I mean? Like, was it still the same writing a book, or does it feel different?
When I wrote The Sentinel, I gave it to a friend of mine who was an agent at William Morris. I was an agent at a rival agency, but I'd just gotten fired. I've been fired many times. This is not a new thing. I've been fired in proxy fights for control of companies. You know, you gotta tough it out.
Part of it.
But he said to me, I have one comment. I said, what's that? He says, cut the first 150 pages. I said, what? It's the background of all the characters. He says, no one gives a damn. Cut it. I said, no, I can't. No, you're wrong. You're an idiot. And I started editing it. You know, it wound up a page and a half. It was a page and a half. So, in part, I had to learn how to write and how to self-analyze. And a lot of that helped me is when I became a trial lawyer at writing big briefs, as well as an appellate lawyer. I've done 11 appellate appeals. You learn to self-edit, because I don't have an editor reading my appellate briefs. I do it myself. So you learn to self-control. And, you know, when I wrote the first version of the book at 1,300 pages or whatever I said it was, I said, all right, now I got to start cutting. And I went at it mercilessly, got it down to 700. Then I had to get it down to under 150,000 words, or it wouldn't be reviewed. I wound it up at 149,605.
Cheater.
I got it down there. I was cutting things out saying, I like this, but it has to go.
Hey, Jeff, let me ask you a question. We talked about technology. Is your book available in an audiobook? And if it is, what do you think about hearing your own words? And if not, what do you think about the audiobook industry itself?
Well, that's an interesting question. It's not available in audiobooks yet, but it will be. We had a preliminary discussion about how to do an audiobook here. There's so many characters and so many accents. You know, people in the Bowery, because they spoke Yiddish, very rarely ever said G. And a lot of the thugs thought it was cool not to ever speak in anything other than the present tense. So they didn't speak in the past tense. That's why I didn't have anyone edit the book. They would have chopped it up, saying, well, it's past tense. You can't have it present. I said, that's the way they spoke. So we looked at having an ensemble cast, but that was $50,000. I said, there's no way we're doing that. Then I realized the best way to do this, and this is an ongoing discussion, so there will be an audiobook. And in fact, all my I shouldn't say star friend, a lot of people in the industry say, when's the audiobook? We don't have time to read a book, but we'll listen to it as we go to, you know.
Hence the question, yes.
What I realized is the way to do it, forget all the accents. No one person can do all the difference between the way they spoke in Chicago. They couldn't say TH, everything was dat. In the Bowery, they didn't use the G because you don't use the G in Yiddish. So I can't ask someone to do that. But you need one man reading the men's parts, and because there are 4 giant female parts, I need a female. Why? Because I write a lot of repartee. In many scenes, you don't say, yes, she said. No, he countered. Yes, she looked at him. No, he did look back. I just go back and forth. Yes, no, yes, no. That can be confusing. But if it's a woman's voice with a man's voice, especially in the scenes between Madame Dumont, the biggest madam in New York at the time, and my anti-hero, where there's a lot of repartee, and then between my hero and Monaghan, the bad guy, when they finally start going at each other, there's a lot of repartee. So it has to be handled properly. But very soon, momentarily, I'm going to look into the audiobooks. I even have friends of mine saying, hey, we'll finance the audiobook. Let's make a deal. You, your partner, and us, we'll just finance it. So yes, the long-winded answer is yes. I talk too much. And there's also a trade paper, which I'm holding back. There's a trade paper version, I think, at $21.95. But I really want to go with the hardcover for 6 months. I'll feather this in.
This is amazing. It's been a pleasure talking to you.
I hope I made some sense.
As much as we do.
Yes.
Yeah, you make as much sense as we ever do.
Much more.
Much more, yeah. The Circus of Satan, Jeffrey Konvitz. Thank you very much.
It's on Amazon and Barnes, and I look forward to people enjoying it.
Thank you.
Thank you.
fiction, science fiction, horror, fantasy, crime, LGBT, thriller.
You have now entered the